Welcome to This Explainer. Today, we're unpacking a story that seriously has it all. We're talking wartime paranoia, highly classified government projects, Albert Einstein, and a naval warship that supposedly just vanished into thin air. It is one of the most enduring, horrifying, and honestly fascinating conspiracy theories in American history. It's an incredible narrative that has sparked countless late-night debates, books, and movies over the years. But as we dig into the actual classified history of World War II, we're going to find out exactly what happened back then, and perhaps more importantly, what absolutely didn't. Let's jump right in. Okay, picture the setting. It's October 1943. America is right in the middle of the bloodiest naval war the world has ever seen. The story goes that at the Philadelphia Naval Shipyard, the U.S. Navy was running a highly classified test on a brand new Cannon-class destroyer escort called the USS Eldridge. Now, according to the legend, they switched on these enormous electromagnetic field generators, and in this blinding flash of blue-white light, this massive 1,240-ton warship vanished entirely from the harbor, like literally disappeared. And then supposedly, within seconds, it reappeared over 200 miles away in Norfolk, Virginia, materialized just long enough for sailors on another ship to see it, and then teleported straight back to Philadelphia. If this actually happened, it would undeniably be the most astonishing technological achievement in human history. But here's where the story gets incredibly dark, and it's really this sheer horror that cemented the myth in our cultural memory. According to the legend, playing God with spacetime came with an absolutely unthinkable human cost. The claims state that when naval personnel finally boarded the ship after it returned, it was a waking nightmare. Supposedly, the crew was violently ill and some had gone completely mad. Other men were reportedly just gone, vanished into the void. But the most grotesque detail, the one that really sticks in your head, is the claim that several sailors were found partially embedded in the ship's structure. Their bodies were supposedly literally fused into the solid steel decks and bulkheads. It's a terrifying, haunting image. So let's look at part one, the lone eyewitness, the man who started it all. Now, you'd probably assume a story this explosive came from some high-level whistleblower with top-secret clearance, right? Nope. The entire foundation of this legend rests on a series of really eccentric letters written over a decade later, in 1956. They were penned by a highly unreliable ex-mariner named Carl Allen, who sometimes went by the alias Carlos Allende. He sent these letters to a UFO researcher named Morris Jessup, claiming he had personally watched the Eldridge dematerialize from the deck of a nearby merchant ship. But here's the thing about Allen. He was a deeply isolated guy, completely prone to spinning these elaborate, constantly shifting narratives. And when Jessup Oxley pressed him for any verifiable evidence, or even just the names of the injured crewmen, Allen was incredibly evasive. To any rational observer looking at this at the time, he was really just a lone crockpot writing letters. But the myth absolutely exploded because of a wildly bizarre chain of events that happened next. In 1957, the Office of Naval Research received this anonymous package with a Happy Easter note attached. Inside was a copy of Jessup's UFO book, but it was absolutely covered in dense, handwritten notes in 3 different colors of ink. It looked like 3 distinct military insiders were having a written conversation in the margins about the advanced physics of the Philadelphia experiment. Well, 2 Navy officers, Captain Sidney Sherby and Commander George Hoover, got personally fascinated by this weird book. Acting on pure personal curiosity, they actually had a military contractor called Vero Manufacturing privately print 127 copies of it. By passing this around in military circles, they accidentally gave this completely crazed story a massive aura of government legitimacy. And the wild kicker to all of this? Years later, Carl Allen actually admitted in a letter to his father that he had faked the whole thing. He forged all 3 of those annotator voices completely by himself. Allen also managed to elevate his hoax by pulling in the ultimate scientific authority. He claimed the Navy was using Albert Einstein's Unified Field Theory to bend space-time. I mean, it was a brilliant move. By invoking the most famous scientist in the entire world, a guy whose name was practically synonymous with impossible-sounding physics, Allen wrapped his fiction in the seductive veneer of theoretical science. It sounded just plausible enough to a non-specialist to totally spark their imagination. Which brings us to part 2, the seeds of truth and the real wartime science. You know, a conspiracy theory rarely survives for long unless it has at least some roots in reality. Back in 1943, the Allies were losing catastrophic, truly devastating numbers of merchant ships to German U-boats in the Atlantic. The Germans were using these deadly magnetic mines and torpedoes that would detonate the second they detected the natural distortion of the Earth's magnetic field caused by a massive steel ship driving overhead. So the Allied countermeasure for this was a highly classified, totally real-world technology called degaussing. So here is how this actually worked. The Navy would literally wrap the ship's entire hull in incredibly thick electrical cables. Then they'd fire up powerful high-voltage generators, sending massive electrical currents surging through those cables. This generated a counter-magnetic field that precisely canceled out the ship's own natural magnetic signature. It was brilliant. The Navy essentially made the ship magnetically invisible. To a U-boat sensors, the ship just simply wasn't there. But sailors being sailors, they just used slang for it and casually called it making the ship invisible. You can see how quickly rumors would completely misunderstand that as actual visual invisibility. Now take this highly secret electrical procedure and combine it with the damp, salty maritime air, and you get a very real, well-known weather phenomenon called St. Elmo's fire. When you run that much high voltage through cables in a moist environment, it can produce an eerie green plasma glow, a corona discharge, all around the ship. Imagine being a young sailor back in 1943. You're looking out into the dusk of a Philadelphia harbor, and you see a classified destroyer wrapped in cables, humming with massive generators and glowing a ghostly green color. It was a genuinely weird sight. It's super easy to see how that got embellished into a paranormal teleportation event over decades of storytelling. All right, let's move to part 3, the reality check. Time to look at the logs, physics, and facts. The moment we systematically separate the science fiction from the historical facts, this entire myth completely falls apart. The most damning, slam-dunk piece of evidence against the whole story is the USS Eldridge's own declassified war diary and deck logs. Remember, the core claim here is that this ship was sitting in Philadelphia on October 28, 1943. But the official logs definitively prove the ship was actually hundreds of miles away on a totally standard shakedown cruise down in the Bahamas during that exact entire period. She never even made port in Philadelphia between her commissioning in August and December of 1943. She literally just wasn't there. And what about that famous Einstein connection? Well, that falls apart under scrutiny too. Yes, Albert Einstein did actually consult for the U.S. Navy in 1943 and 44, but declassified records clearly show he was working for the Bureau of Ordnance, consulting strictly on the physics of conventional explosives and detonations. He was nowhere near anything related to electromagnetic cloaking. And as for his unified field theory, he never actually finished it. It was still incomplete when he died in 1955. It's a theoretical, mathematical framework to describe nature, not some kind of engineering blueprint to bend a massive destroyer through space and time. And honestly, the crucial point to remember is that even if we totally ignore the historical records, the physics themselves are just completely impossible. Modern physicists widely agree that bending visible light around a massive steel vessel was categorically impossible with 1940s tech. And optical invisibility on that kind of massive scale remains physically impossible even today. As for teleporting a 1,240-ton ship 200 miles, there is simply no known physical mechanism to do that without completely violating the fundamental laws of matter and energy. So let's tally this up. When we line up the core claims of this legend against the historical and scientific verdicts, every single paranormal element gets definitively debunked. The ship wasn't even in the city. The physics absolutely do not work. Carl Allen openly admitted to making up his insider proof. And guess what? Absolutely zero medical records, hospital logs, or next of kin claims ever surfaced to back up those horrific stories of sailors being fused into steel. It is, undeniably, a completely false story that was just built on top of a true but mundane skeleton. Okay, so part 4. Anatomy of a legend, and why this story survives today. If the evidence completely destroys the myth, why does it remain one of America's most famous conspiracy theories? I mean, this thing still generates over 60,000 web searches every single month. Well, the legend survived because it didn't stay static. It continuously mutated and evolved. It just kept absorbing sensational new claims over the decades. In 1984, a sci-fi movie came out about the experiment. Right after that, a guy named Al Bielek started showing up at UFO conferences in the 1990s, suddenly claiming he was a sailor who had time-traveled off the Eldridge into the year 1983. Bielek very conveniently recovered these memories only after watching that movie. The myth just kept growing, soaking up concepts like time travel, mind control, and spontaneous combustion, creating this endless loop that always gives believers a brand new rabbit hole to jump down. Furthermore, this story survives because of the timing of the era. The story originally took root because, well, the government actually was hiding miraculous, impossible-sounding technologies during World War II. When the general public finally learned about things like radar, stealth concepts, and the atomic bomb, it permanently changed our perception of what was actually possible. When real governments can pull off seemingly miraculous tech breakthroughs in absolute secrecy, it creates a very fertile ground for extraordinary rumors to thrive. But on a deeper, psychological level, the gruesome imagery of this myth, especially those poor sailors fused into the steel bulkheads, reflects a very real human anxiety. It taps right into our fear of unchecked scientific experimentation, pushing way beyond safe moral boundaries. In a lot of ways, the Philadelphia experiment basically acts as a dark fable about human hubris and the terrifying unintended consequences that can happen when incredibly powerful technology exceeds our ability to control it. Ultimately, this is the story of how real wartime secrecy, one very eccentric letter writer with way too much time on his hands, and our own collective imaginations managed to transform an ordinary destroyer escort into an immortal ghost ship. The real USS Eldridge served very honorably during the war, escorting convoys, and was later transferred to the Greek Navy, where it served for over 40 years. It never teleported, but it did achieve something perhaps even stranger. It became an absolute legend. Which leaves us with one final, pretty provocative thought about the nature of conspiracy theories themselves. The archives are wide open now. The physics are completely settled. The original witness literally confessed to making it up. So if the facts so clearly show it's a myth, what does our enduring desire to keep believing in the Philadelphia experiment say about us? Maybe in a world that is so heavily regulated and understood, we just crave the existence of the impossible a little bit more than we care about the truth. Thanks for joining me on this explainer today, and as always, keep asking questions.